Hello everyone, and welcome to my Beyond the Gates official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Where everyone pretends sunshine is permanent and secrets never slip through the cracks, Leslie Warren thought she had finally outrun her past, sealing away that turbulent chapter with Tomas, the ex-fiancé who broke her heart and nearly derailed her entire life. She believed she had reinvented herself. New fiancé, new neighborhood, new career at the hospital foundation, and above all new friends who didn't remember who she used to be, especially Eva Harrington, her elegant, razor-smiling confidant who always sat beside her at charity luncheons looking like she'd never known desperation a day in her life. But on a seemingly calm Thursday morning, just after Leslie clicked shut her laptop and prepared to meet Eva for brunch, the past she had carefully buried reopened like an unhealed wound, because Alan appeared at her door unannounced, wild-eyed, road-worn, his breath shallow like someone who had outrun a storm that was still chasing him. Leslie froze at the threshold, too shocked to even form his name, but he said it for her. "Leslie, I don't have time to explain how I found you, but you need to listen to me. It's about Eva." Suddenly the world seemed to tilt, because Eva was the one person Leslie never expected to hear from his lips, and Alan, whose voice had always carried manipulation and chaos, now trembled like a man sitting on a nuclear secret. At first, Leslie tried to slam the door. She wanted to protect her newly stabilized life, her pending engagement, her blooming social reputation, but Alan shoved the door with a desperate hand, whispering, "Eva isn't who you think she is. She's lying to you. And if you don't leave her behind, she's going to destroy you the same way she destroyed me." Leslie felt her pulse spike. Eva? Destroy? How could the perfectly composed Eva, the woman who donated to children's oncology wings and baked lemon squares for every fundraiser, be someone carrying the kind of darkness that could make Tomas look terrified? He stepped inside without an invitation, glancing toward the street as if expecting someone to follow him, and Leslie could smell gasoline, adrenaline, and fear on him. He said he had been digging into something for weeks, something involving Eva's real identity, her past in Chicago, the people she swindled, the husband she erased, the fortune that vanished, and a federal investigation that never fully closed. And Leslie thought he was speaking out of jealousy or spite, because Alan always believed any woman who moved on from him must have been manipulated. But then he dropped the sentence that made her blood curdle. Eva Harrington is not her name. She used to be married under another one, and 6 years ago, her first husband disappeared. They never found his body. Leslie's knees nearly buckled, because even though Fairmont Crest was a buzzing hive of scandal, murder was a different league, an unspoken taboo that threatened everything the town pretended to be. Alan said Eva reinvented herself twice, crossing state lines, laundering her identity through shell nonprofits and charitable fronts, and then infiltrating Fairmont Crest as though she had scouted the richest place to bury her past. Leslie refused to believe it. Eva had opened her home, shared wine, cried over heartbreaks, confessed family tensions. Eva was the reason Leslie felt accepted in the town after years of emotional humiliation from Alan. But that was when Alan leaned in and said, quietly, like a man remembering a nightmare, "She did the same thing to me. I thought she was my friend, I thought she wanted to help me, and then she used me to get to people with access, and once she got what she needed, suddenly I was the problem. And trust me, Leslie, once you become Eva's problem, you don't survive socially, professionally, or financially. She doesn't destroy you overnight. She starves your life until you have nowhere left to go." Leslie wanted to scream at him to stop poisoning her new reality, but a part of her remembered small, strange details. Eva refusing to talk about Chicago, Eva burning old photographs in her fire pit last spring, Eva casually mentioning she never kept sentimental items because attachments create leverage. And suddenly, Leslie couldn't breathe. Alan paced like an animal in captivity, explaining that he found a man who swore Eva had stolen millions from a cancer research charity, falsified grant records, fabricated staff, and vanished before audit season, exactly 1 month before her first husband disappeared. That was the moment Leslie truly looked into Alan's eyes and saw something she'd never seen in him before. Not obsession, not vindictiveness, but genuine fear. The kind that makes a man abandon pride and cross the country to warn the one woman he ever loved properly. Leslie thought she had escaped her past by leaving Alan, but what if his arrival wasn't a regression, but a warning flare? She whispered that Eva was family to her now, the maid of honor in her upcoming wedding, the godmother proposal waiting in an envelope for Leslie's unborn child. She was too nervous to tell anyone about yet. Alan shook his head like a man who wished he weren't right, saying Eva chooses women like Leslie because naive trust is currency, because Leslie's philanthropic reputation could launder Eva's criminal past clean. And then Alan told her the final secret, the one he had held back until the moment she couldn't run from it. Eva didn't come to Fairmont Crest for charity or friendship. She came for Bill Harrington's estate. His entire bloodline is circling the drain, and when he dies, Eva stands to inherit everything. She married into a fortune, and every person who stood between her and that fortune has disappeared. You are standing between her and her final payout, Leslie. And Eva knows it. Leslie staggered back as Alan's accusations hung in the air like poison, and suddenly brunch with Eva seemed like a trap instead of a social outing, because if everything Alan claimed was true, then Eva might already know that Leslie was being warned, and the idea that her closest confidant could be calculating her emotional demise made Leslie's stomach twist with dread. Yet she still clung to the belief that Fairmont Crest was a civilized haven where second chances didn't come at the price of someone else's life. But Alan insisted the town's glossy perfection gave sociopaths the ideal camouflage, and Eva mastered the art of appearing philanthropic while hollowing out vulnerable people from the inside. And just as Leslie tried to steady her voice, convincing herself this was Alan dragging her down again, he pulled an old photograph from his jacket, its edges weather-creased, showing Eva younger, blonde instead of brunette, arm in arm with a man Leslie had never seen, handsome, smiling. Wedding band glinting, yet the background revealed something alarming. The banner behind them bore the logo of a medical foundation Eva once claimed she'd only briefly volunteered for, and Alan whispered that this man was Andrew Kessler, a multi-millionaire biotech investor whose remains were never recovered, whose disappearance sparked a fraud investigation that mysteriously died when Eva left the state, and before Leslie could argue, Alan pulled another slip of evidence, an old charity brochure listing Eva Kessler as the executive director of financial operations, and Leslie felt a nauseating chill because Eva once told her she had never handled money for any organization due to an anxious temperament, which now read as a calculated lie. But before Leslie could fall apart, her phone buzzed with a text from Eva herself. "Brunch at 11? We need to talk about Bill." That last sentence slammed terror into Leslie's chest because Bill Harrington, Eva's elderly husband, had been battling a quiet decline, and Eva had shepherded every medical document, kept every doctor on a short leash, controlled every visitor like a hawk guarding spoils, and Leslie remembered Eva joking over white wine that old men with wills required active supervision. And Alan muttered that Eva would time Bill's passing with strategic elegance, ensuring every dissenting relative was neutralized, cut out, or psychologically dismantled until signing legal surrender felt voluntary. And suddenly Leslie remembered how Eva smirked when Bill's distant niece dropped opposition to power of attorney, how Eva comforted her like a sister while simultaneously ensuring she resigned rights she didn't understand. And Leslie whispered that maybe Eva was just persuasive. Maybe she was a fixer in a town that thrived on quiet negotiations, but Alan shook his head again, saying Eva preyed on desperation and used grief as a scalpel, and Leslie asked why Alan was only now coming forward, why he had stayed silent for years, and his voice broke when he said he tried to go to authorities but lacked physical evidence, that Eva always destroyed paper trails, always used intermediaries, always left others holding the legal liability. And he himself nearly faced indictment after signing what he thought were routine grant transfers. He said Eva abandoned him the moment law enforcement got involved, moving on to fatter pastures, richer targets, and new emotional puppets. And Leslie recoiled because she realized she had been offering Eva exactly what she needed, a stabilizing public ally, a woman with professional credibility, someone whose glowing testimonials shielded Eva from suspicion. But before Leslie could sink into despair, Alan said there was more, something even darker, something that threatened the delicate lives of people Leslie cared about, namely the doctors and administrators at the Fairmont Oncology Wing, because Eva had been quietly pushing for board changes, seeking access to donor ledgers, financial records, and oncology investment contracts that could be diverted without public detection, and if that portfolio shifted into Eva's shell accounts, Fairmont Crest's most celebrated hospital project would crumble overnight, leaving sick children without treatment. And that was what made Alan cry, because he couldn't let Leslie become complicit in another one of Eva's elegant financial murders, and as Leslie absorbed this, she wondered whether Eva's interest in her pregnancy, the pregnancy, was not warmth but reconnaissance, because Eva had asked whether Leslie planned to take maternity leave, whether she intended to modify her board access permissions, whether she wanted Eva to handle paperwork during her absence. And now the questions felt like reconnaissance for a crime instead of support from a friend, and Leslie's heart thundered with dread as she clutched her abdomen protectively, terrified that Eva viewed her unborn child as a vulnerability to exploit, a leash to tighten, a way to ensure Leslie stayed compliant. Alan grabbed her shoulders, telling her not to go to brunch, to pack a bag, to leave town, but Leslie shook her head, because running would confirm guilt, would send Eva after her, would mark her as prey. And Leslie realized she needed to gather proof before making any move, and she asked Alan what the next step should be, and he said he had arranged a meeting that night with a former investigator from Chicago PD who unofficially tracked Eva's movements. A man who lost his pension trying to expose corruption tied to the Kessler disappearance, a man willing to talk only if Leslie showed up personally, because her reputation made her trustworthy by default, and Leslie trembled at the weight of that responsibility. She, a woman who once collapsed under Alan's emotional manipulation, now thrust as the moral fulcrum in a conspiracy stretching across state lines, fraud networks, inheritance schemes, and possibly a homicide cover-up. But before she could respond, another knock rattled the door. Sharp, confident, purposeful, and both Leslie and Alan froze, staring at each other in silent terror, because no one else knew Alan was here, and when Leslie peeked through the peephole, she nearly fainted. It was Eva, immaculate as ever, holding a box of pastries and smiling like a woman incapable of sin. And Leslie realized she had less than 5 seconds to decide whether to hide Alan, confront Eva, or walk willingly into the lion's mouth. Leslie's pulse jackhammered as she stared at Eva's perfectly composed silhouette through the peephole, the pastel bakery box balanced in one manicured hand as though this were a casual visit between two ordinary women, not a potential collision between predator and prey, and Leslie hissed for Alan to move, to hide, but Alan shook his head violently, mouthing, "Don't let her in. She'll read you." Yet Leslie knew that refusing Eva would raise suspicions immediately because Eva Harrington didn't handle rejection gracefully. She mentally catalogued every deviation from routine, every shift in tone, every friend who suddenly ducked invitations, as if friendship were a controlled laboratory experiment where she monitored emotional compliance. So Leslie forced her face into a polite mask and opened the door with a brittle smile, pretending not to notice Alan pressed into the shadows of the hallway. Eva swept inside with a soft laugh, saying she had been in the neighborhood and figured they could review the new proposal for Bill's medical trust, but her eyes, her eyes, darted across the living room with surgical precision, registering misplaced throw pillows, an open back door, the faint trace of adrenaline in the air, and she said lightly, "You look flushed, dear. Were you exercising?" And Leslie murmured something about a bad night's sleep, but Eva tilted her head, sensing micro-hesitations like a human lie detector, and set the pastries down as if staging them for interrogation. "Bait," and Leslie's skin prickled as Eva lowered her voice and said she had been thinking a lot about legacy, about Bill's final stretch, as she called it, as if death were a business phase, and she wanted Leslie to serve as a witness to some updated documents, because Leslie was family now and trustworthy and unencumbered by the Harrington bloodline's emotional instability, and Leslie nearly choked at that phrasing, wondering how many Harrington relatives Eva had deemed unstable before, isolating them out of the estate conversation entirely. But before she could stall, Eva suddenly paused mid-sentence, her gaze sharpening toward the hallway, where she'd sensed movement or breath, or maybe just a disruption in atmospheric confidence, and Leslie prayed Alan stayed silent, because Eva's intuition felt carnivorous. Eva smiled and said she had spoken to Bill's physicians about condensing the latest reports into a private file, less exposure, fewer eyes, and maybe even moving Bill to in-home hospice rather than clinical care, since oversight was exhausting, and Leslie's stomach twisted at the idea of Eva locking Bill away from the world, controlling medication dosages, limiting access to any witness who might challenge her power of attorney. And when Leslie asked whether the doctors supported a transfer, Eva let a cold silence settle before saying doctors were advisors, not decision-makers. And legacy required decisiveness, especially before probate got messy. And Leslie realized that Eva spoke about death the way others spoke about meal prep, methodical, strategic, emotionless. Then Eva said something that made Leslie's blood run cold. "I know change is uncomfortable, but control is the only kindness we can offer a dying man." And the implication felt like a confession disguised as philosophy, but Eva immediately softened her tone, pivoting to compliments, telling Leslie she admired her clarity and loyalty, and gently mentioning that she had noticed Leslie had been distracted lately and hoped nothing was undermining her peace, because anxiety made people unreliable, especially as witnesses to legal commitments, and Leslie understood the threat embedded in that sweetness, the expectation that Leslie remained stable, silent, obedient. Suddenly Eva's eyes sharpened again, and she asked directly whether Leslie had seen anyone unusual in town, anyone from the past, because Eva believed old acquaintances complicated progress, and Leslie forced a laugh, insisting nothing was wrong. But her voice cracked and Eva caught it like a forensic sample, and she asked if Leslie would like to talk about whatever was troubling her, offering intimacy like a weapon with velvet lining, and Leslie shook her head, terrified that any disclosure, even accidental, would sign someone's death certificate. Eva mirrored discomfort with a theatrical sigh, then announced that she had another appointment in 20 minutes, but they should absolutely meet at noon to finalize witness documents, and she would text the location shortly. Somewhere quiet, she insisted, somewhere without institutional distractions. And then she reached out and touched Leslie's arm, lightly, like a microclaim of ownership, whispering, "Dependability is everything in a friend, Leslie. I'm so glad I can depend on you." Then Eva glided out, closing the door as gently as a coffin lid, and only when her heels faded down the walkway did Leslie turn to Alan, who looked like he'd seen a ghost wearing perfume. He said that Eva's intuition bordered on predatory clairvoyance, that she had doubtless sensed male presence but couldn't pinpoint context, and that made her dangerous because unanswered questions turned into surveillance. Leslie felt faint as she realized Eva intended to isolate her further by inviting her somewhere quiet, which might be a location without witnesses, and she told Alan she needed proof immediately, more than anecdotes, more than half-buried files, and Alan nodded, saying the Chicago investigator, Marcus Hale, was waiting in a motel outside town, living under the radar, and that they had one shot to get his testimony before Eva's network sensed pressure. But Leslie panicked because noon was only hours away, meaning she'd have to meet Marcus before then, gather intel, and decide whether to publicly support or defy Eva's legal maneuver. And Alan said Eva always accelerated timelines when she sensed instability, so her scheduling meant she had detected threat and was moving into containment mode. Leslie grabbed her coat, adrenaline spiking, shouting that she would go meet Marcus in person, but Alan caught her wrist and reminded her that Eva tracked phones, monitored location pings, and could triangulate movement through a friend in telecommunications, or at least Alan believed so.